Hello and welcome back to another episode of Majlis and Markets. I am your host Hassan Javraj. In this podcast, we bring you insightful conversations with influential leaders in Islamic and global markets. As usual, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get in touch with us also by emailing us at hassan@majlisandmarkets.com and be sure to follow us on LinkedIn. Today, we're exploring Iraq's VC ecosystem. After years of instability, Iraq's political and security situation is improving, opening up new opportunities for economic growth. With a young, tech-savvy population, many are starting businesses in areas like fintech and e-commerce. The potential is there, but challenges like funding, infrastructure, and regulation still slow things down. Our guest today is Zahra Shah. Since 2019, she's been leading Iraqi Innovators, a media and data hub supporting Iraq's investment ecosystem. Her work gives her key insights into startups and helps shape the future of Iraq's industries. In our discussion, we dive into Iraq's VC potential and the day-to-day challenges entrepreneurs face, like limited funding and tricky regulations. Zahra Shah, welcome to Majlis and Markets. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Hassan. So nice to be here.
Zahra, you've got like a really fascinating background. I've followed your work for the last year or so when I was writing an article on the Iraq tech ecosystem for a publication, and then you kindly invited me to your event earlier this year at the Iraq. I think it was at the Arab Chamber of Commerce on the
Yeah,
Iraq tech scene and what's going on over there. But before we get into all of that, Zahra, I really want to get a take on your background. Could you give our listeners like your story and like your background?
sure. So I did my undergraduate degree in English and drama. Very, very different to what people expect. I didn't want to be an actress, but I just had a passion for theatre and kind of the behind the scenes of theatre and script writing. So that's why I went down that path. But I was also like the only Muslim kid in the drama department. And then after that, I started working in a startup, which was Groupon. In history, it's still the fastest growing startup in the world. And just being in that atmosphere and that whole vibe, you're a very fast growing company. I started out in customer service as a part-time job while at uni, and then when I graduated, I joined the editorial team, and I loved it. But I wasn't so keen on the focus on profits at the time. So I quit my job and I pursued a master's in international relations, and I moved to the Netherlands to do that. So I went to Leiden University for a year. And I had it in my head that I wanted to work for the UN. I did a few internships with different UN organizations, unpaid, and I even founded an NGO for a bit in The Hague. It was a really interesting time of self-discovery, and I just thought, naively, yeah, I'm gonna work towards saving the world. And then quickly I realized that actually I need something that marries the tech startup side with the humanitarian side. And that's when I came across Gaza Sky Geeks, which was it's a tech accelerator, incubator, coding school, freelance academy in the Gaza Strip. And I was like, this is perfect. It does everything I'm interested in. So I worked with them for over a year and a half, and then moved to Iraq to join Recoded's operations and run their coding boot camps. So I think my interest has always been in places that people think are dangerous and scary, and the media always has a particular agenda in covering these places. But for me, I have a lot of interest in Muslim countries and in countries that are often underestimated and undervalued, and that's kind of where it all began.
Fantastic. It sounds like you've had quite a journey so far. Where did the Gaza thing come from? Was that with your gig at the UN?
No, so I was, well, kind of. So I was doing an internship in Jordan for the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees. And some of the desk research I was doing was about support for women in Gaza. And I came across Gaza Sky Geeks through that research. So when I found them, I was like, oh my God, like I need to be involved with this organization somehow. And I initially joined pro bono and then became a consultant with them. So that's kind of how that began. I was always interested in Gaza from my university advocacy days with the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and a Palestine Society. So that interest was always there. My university also did a trip to Gaza, but I wasn't allowed to go at the time. My parents didn't let me. So that interest in Gaza was there for years, and it was like finally my chance to pursue it.
Fantastic. And then you pivoted to Iraq after that?
Yeah, so I ended up, also like getting married, settling down in Jordan, moved there to live there permanently, and I was looking for more permanent work because my role with Gaza Sky Geeks was remote, and I wanted somewhere where it was easier to travel to, and I could be there, 24/7. And that's when the role came up in Iraq, and Iraq is a place that I've always wanted to visit for multiple reasons. And yeah, it was just the timing of it all. And it's interesting because I remember at the time I had a job offer in Jordan and then the job offer in Iraq. And I had this massive conundrum because obviously the comfort was staying in Jordan because I had just moved everything there from London. And then having to like 6 months later move everything to Iraq, would it be feasible, etc. But in the end, my husband was super supportive, quit his job, and we went to Iraq.
And what year was this when you moved to Iraq?
2017.
Wow. Okay. So that's like nearly seven. Yeah, it's about 7 years ago, 7, 8 years ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. So when I moved there, it was August, and ISIS was still in Mosul at the time. And I remember my brother was like losing it. He's like, why are you moving to Erbil, which is a 2.5 hour drive from Mosul? Don't you know that ISIS are there? Like he was freaking out. And I was like, I'm pretty sure it's fine. I know that there are other expats that work there. I know that the UN is based there. So I'm sure everybody was okay. I mean, bearing in mind, I had never ever been to Iraq. And even though my husband's Iraqi, he also had barely been because he lived most of his life in Jordan. So I was like, I'm sure it's okay. Again, at that time, I was just like, I have a very high, I'm not very risk averse. So let's just go and find out kind of thing. But my brother was like looking into the cost of hiring private militias to come and save me if I needed it. Like that's how freaked out he was.
And you started off in Erbil, right? Before you went down to Baghdad.
So yeah, I spent most of my time in Erbil, almost 2 years, and then I spent 6 months in Basra, with lots of travel to Baghdad and other cities.
Fantastic. So it sounds like, yeah, you've moved around from London to Holland to Jordan and then to Iraq. So it's like you've been moving around a little bit over the past few years.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Zahra, we had a Mohammed Khoderi, like I was mentioning to you offline. We had Mohammed Khoderi on as I think episode 4, and then we've also interviewed Matteo Montavani from Bali, and we also had kindly introduced us to Mehdi at
Yeah.
your event in June. And that was really fascinating talking to all three of them. We talked from Mohammed's side, which was the investing side, and we talked to Matteo's side, which was the startup founder and someone who's received, or like part of a venture that received quite like a significant sum of money from investors. And then also we talked to Mehdi, who gave us like the beginnings of his journey into tackling a sector which hasn't really been addressed in Iraq, both say like tech and non-tech solutions. But from your perspective, Zahra, why is Iraq a emerging or burgeoning tech ecosystem in the region?
So I get this question a lot, and the answer changes year by year. There's obviously the main factors, one being the youthful population, smartphone penetration rate is increasing, access to social media. I think TikTok is one of the biggest, Iraq is one of the biggest markets for TikTok. So there's a lot of that stuff going on, and it's only increasing. And also with the payments landscape, that's also improving. People are using more digital payments as time progresses. For me, I mean, I've been involved with that ecosystem from a very early stage. You know, in 2017, people were still learning what the word entrepreneurship meant. And there was only a couple of incubation programs, and even the word startup, people didn't quite understand what that was. So where it is now, I mean, the growth has been phenomenal. Yes, it's been, I guess, compared to other markets, it's slower, but that's only because of the unique circumstances that the country has been through. But where it's heading now, that growth is just exponentially increasing year by year. And you're seeing now a lot of diaspora founders coming back into the market and launching their ventures and actually becoming successful. And obviously, they have an edge because they have wider networks, they can raise funding more easily. But I think the market opportunity here is, and I mentioned this in the event you attended, like if you want to get involved in Iraq, now is the time, because it's that the timing is such that the government is getting involved. It's doing a lot of rapid development in all sectors. There's a lot more foreign investment coming in. And there's been, you know, like the AFC Iraq Fund was the highest performing fund in the world. There's a lot of potential for investment, but now is really the time to get involved, because then you're going to see that spike and you'll benefit from that spike in the next 5 to 10 years, versus if you could get in later and you're paying more later and your return is less. So it's you're also seeing like a lot more startups coming into the mold with more unique solutions. One that I've been following quite closely is 1001, which is the legal, you know, streaming service, kind of like a Netflix. And they've been doing a phenomenal job to encourage legal streaming, provide that with a subscription service, and build loads of interesting partnerships with different, you know, content providers. And it's stuff like that that I think gives a lot of hope to the youth, but also to regional and international investors.
What's interesting, I think, like Iraq is quite a unique market, right? I think, like you said, its security and political situation for its own standards has been improving over the past, say, 5 or 6 years. You know, the economy seems to be back on a better footing than it was, say, 4 or 5 years ago. And, you know, you've got all these different sectors which need solutions, right? Like, I remember when I was writing that article on the tech ecosystem, we spoke to, I think, Basima from Kesk, and
Yeah.
I was like really surprised, like someone come up with like green tech solutions in a country like Iraq.
Yeah.
But it seems like there's a lot of opportunities in different sectors, right?
Absolutely. I mean, Basima is really like one of the most amazing entrepreneurs in the country as well, because working in Iraq, especially as a woman, it makes things 10 times harder. And especially in the space where she's in with green tech, I think you're kind of fighting a massive industry there where the people that own generators don't really want you to come and take their work away, right?
Mm.
And that's, you know, that's like a monopoly. So it's there are challenges, and I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. There are massive challenges in exploring new ventures in sectors that have been traditionally managed by families, or, you know, and monopolized by particular businessmen. But the tide has to change at some point, and I think the government's also recognizing this and trying to support new business.
What would you say some of the biggest challenges are across the board, not just specific to like say one sector? Do you think there's like all like challenges all founders have or people in the industry have?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think you know, network, wherever you are, network is really important, and it's often underestimated when people who are successful claim to be self-made. There's really no such thing. In Iraq, that network is also as equally important. But I feel like actually what's easier in Iraq is getting to know the people that you need to know to get things done. It's kind of like, you know, your 6 degrees of separation. I think in Iraq it's like 3 degrees of separation. It's not that hard to connect with people. But it is challenging sometimes to just get the admin done. Like if you want to register your company, and again, they are trying to make this all easier and they are trying to digitize. So what I'm saying now might not be relevant in the next year even. But just things like registering your company can be costly and bureaucratic. Doing your paperwork, doing like finding good team members. There's a lot of talent, but it's very hard to find like very committed people who can join a startup and kind of be ready for that grind. So that these are, I mean, some of the challenges that I've also personally faced with Iraqi innovators, and I've had conversations with other startup founders who have similar challenges. Sometimes as well, just like finding the right talent to push your product forward, and if you're going to scale, scaling can be quite difficult when there's not a lot of much of an e-payment system that's widely adopted. Again, that's rapidly changing and evolving, but it's been a huge problem for a lot of, let's say, e-commerce businesses.
Yeah, Iraq, I think, is very similar to other countries in this kind of development. It's still very cash based, right? It's not very
Yes,
e-money, e-wallet kind of thing.
exactly.
Zahra, one thing that came to my mind when you were talking about scalability was that Mohammed Khoderi, when we spoke to him, and we've spoken to other investors as well in the VC space, and a lot of them say that one of the biggest challenges in Iraq is things like going beyond Series A. So, pre-seed, seed, and then they get
Yeah.
anything like, say, beyond, say, $3-4 million can be quite a stretch. Do you think that's like a challenge for a lot of startups that are in that scale-up stage?
100%. I think to date, we only know of one publicly announced startup that's raised Series A. So seed, pre-seed, a lot more common. Doesn't mean it's easier. But Series A, we only know of one startup that's raised that round. So it is very challenging because people, it depends as well on the investors you're talking to, right? Most of the investors to date that have supported startups have been from within Iraq or among the diaspora. It's really challenging to get regional and international investors to notice Iraq. It's something I've tried a lot. And I've noticed, I think in the last year, they are starting to pay more attention, especially the regional investors. But it's been really slow to get that attention. And I think it stems from just a lack of knowledge of what's happening in the country. They haven't physically ever been. So what would they know? And that's, that can be solved quite easily. We do like investor tours and trips and things like that, show them what they're not able to see on the news. And that will improve over time. But yeah, I mean, I am finally starting to see some regional investors making trips to Iraq, speaking to startups. And I think you'll see, more of their involvement in the next few years.
I mean, if you compare, like, say, Iraq's tech ecosystem to somewhere like Egypt or even Jordan, for example, how would you compare? Like, would you say Iraq still has like a long way to go compared to, say, some of the more developed ecosystems in the region?
Definitely. I mean, compared to Egypt, like the much bigger gap between the two. But with Jordan, I don't see the gap as huge. I think Jordan's done a good job on a governmental level to try and support the ecosystem and its growth through, like their ministries and everything. But even they've got a lot of their own challenges in terms of their infrastructure and the way it's designed and the bureaucracy. So Iraq is not as so dissimilar to Jordan. I think it's just a matter of how quickly can Iraq fix these issues in order to catch up.
I mean, Iraq is still quite a risky place to do business for investors, right?
I guess it depends on the type of business and the network that you have involved in that business. Risky in the sense that you're going to lose it all, or someone might take it from you or something like that. Not really. If you've got a strong network, if you've got potential clients, and Mahdi is testament to this. I mean, he gave up his life in the UK to move there and start a business, and he's doing great. It's absolutely possible. I think with any business, any venture you open in any country, you need to make sure that you study the market well before you go in there. Otherwise, you're just you're kind of signing your own failure.
I think also what's interesting, if you look at it, right, like Iraq's relationship with Saudi Arabia and like some of the other Gulf countries has only really come up in the last, say, 4 or 5 years. So as the political relations and economic relations get better, then I guess you see like this flow of like funds coming from the region, right? I don't think you're going to see the likes of Sequoia or some of these big funds from the US coming to Iraq anytime soon.
For sure. And I mean, a lot of these, so on the side of the UAE and the Gulf states, I mean, Saudi has invested billions already now into Iraq, into real estate, and they're planning to invest more. So they're obviously seeing potential there, and that relationship has significantly improved. But no, I don't think we're going to see Sequoia or any of these funds coming in anytime soon. I think a lot of that also has to do with the economy at the moment, and they're probably struggling to raise money anyway. So they'd probably come to Iraq if they think they can make money out of it, but it doesn't mean they'd invest the money in Iraq.
How much the broader economic or the economy in Iraq is impacting the tech ecosystem, do you think?
Massively. I mean, obviously, it's all linked, isn't it? So if people aren't, for example, if people are struggling financially, then that means they're buying less, and then but they're buying online even less. Things like that will massively impact their behavior and the impact on startups. And I think that's also why a lot of startups are trying to focus on not just having Iraqi customers, but customers outside. So I think we haven't seen much benefit in we haven't seen any success stories in startups venturing outside of Iraq and doing well in other markets. I know some are trying and some are starting to, but that remains to be seen how that goes. But there needs to be that diversification because, like Lebanon, the currency has been butchered, and people who were earning in dollars, they're still doing okay, but the ones who aren't are really struggling. And I think one good move by the Iraqi government is that they are trying to de-dollarize and get rid of that dual economy aspect so that the IQD is stronger. And that will definitely help. But in the long term, again, it remains to be seen how that currency remains stable against the dollar, against the pound. And if startups are making purchases in other currencies and their income is in IQD, but their outgoings are in USD, then, we need to make sure that that stays stable.
Yeah, how would you say the banking sector needs a lot of reform in Iraq before like you can do all of this?
100%. It's a big weakness. And again, this is something they're working on, but it is such a pain to do sort of like a transfer from one bank to another or international transfers. I personally had a heart attack last year because I had transferred money from the UK to an Iraqi bank account, and the money just never showed up in the guy's account, and it went missing for about 6 months.
Oh,
And it wasn't, an amount that I could afford to lose. And it was strange because my bank is like, well, we've sent the money, so what's the deal? They're investigating. It's going through an intermediary bank first in Lebanon, then it gets to the branch in Iraq. And the Lebanon bank is like, well, we've sent it to Iraq. And still the guy in Iraq is like, but it's not in my account. And it just turned out that someone in the Iraq bank just needed to press a few buttons to release the funds. And I don't know what was stopping them from doing that. But my money was tied up for 6 months, and thankfully I was able to finally get it back. But it just didn't make sense that this happened. So there's still a lot of work to be done in banks for sure.
so would you say things like cryptocurrency would be quite ideal in a place like Iraq?
Potentially, but it's banned. So I don't know what the future of crypto is for Iraq, to be honest. But you know, I know that when it wasn't banned and there were a few companies in that space, they were doing really well. What was interesting was so during this de-dollarization process, people were not able to access uh, their dollar accounts in the bank, if they were to withdraw money, that money was coming out in IQD and they were getting a pretty poor rate compared to the black market rate for USD to IQD. So they're losing about 200 to 300 IQD per dollar. And, if you're taking out large sums of money, that adds up. So what they were doing was buying crypto and then doing the exchange in that way to get a better dollar amount out. And I think, since the crackdown on crypto, that's not as possible anymore. Maybe people are still doing it. I really don't know. But there is a massive, massive opportunity for crypto, but I'm not sure how that will all work with kind of, I guess, the lack of knowledge of crypto in the government.
Yeah, and also I think the Iraqi central bank, they devalued the dinar, right, in 2021, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so. Yeah, you're right. They did. And I think that was kind of the beginning of the de-dollarization process, which they sort of escalated, wanted to get it done within a year. And so last year I think it started last year, and then by sort of like March this year or something, they just wanted to completely get rid of dollars.
Why do you think they're just doing this de-dollarization? Because I think each country has their own idiosyncratic story, but like, do you think it's because they're doing a lot of trade with China, or they want to pivot away from the dollar? Why do you think they want to do that?
Yeah, there's definitely more of the wider politics of the region at play here. I think there's a lot of interesting articles, like New York Times have released one about the fall of the petrodollar. And I think the idea is, yes, China is a part of it, that relationship. But also, I don't think it's a bad thing. It's important that you're able to buy and sell oil in any currency you want. At the end of the day, it's your commodity that you can choose how to sell it. But it is about, I think it's about sort of the US's stronghold on the region and the oil. Uh, it's an attempt to diminish that over time.
Yeah, what's also interesting is I don't know if you saw this, but BRICS are coming up with their own payment system away from SWIFT. So I guess like it's for countries to try and diversify their sources of like giving payment, right? So they're not completely reliant on the US dollar and the SWIFT payment mechanism.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really interesting one. I mean, it's a really, it ties in with everything that's happening in the region, even with Gaza and IMEC versus BRICS. And, there's a lot of there's a few political analysts that I follow that have good insights into this space. I won't pretend that I'm an expert in it.
One thing, Zahra, that we've been talking a lot about, like things like soft infrastructure, like regulations and know-how and knowledge. But one thing that comes to my mind when we're talking about Iraq, particularly, is hard infrastructure. I think things like electricity are still an issue, right? Hard infrastructure is still a big challenge for a lot of startups and indeed companies operating across Iraq.
Yeah, it is. And again, mentioning electricity, that is a monopoly on generators and things like that. So you can solve that with solar, you can solve that with better trade between countries. But it also does benefit a lot of people to have the country that way. So I guess it really just depends on whether this level of corruption can be dismantled. And but yeah, I mean, I think that lack of infrastructure especially impacts the hotter areas like Basra. The lack of clean water, the electricity is very minimal during the summer, which, Basra goes up to 60 degrees Celsius and one of the hottest cities in the world. So it's a really, really awful situation to be in, and not sustainable in the long term. And it's, one of the reasons for protests in Basra on a yearly basis. And again, I've from what I'm reading, the government is trying to improve the situation. They're also trying to lay down, like fiber cables. The ISPs are trying to do so. Iraq only got 4G internet a couple of years ago. So there's a lot of work to be done there.
Absolutely. Zahra, as we bring the podcast to a close shortly, one of the areas I want to talk to you about is the role of incubators. I think incubators in any startup ecosystem are important. And Iraq obviously has its own incubators and different like support mechanisms. How important are incubators and these kind of support mechanisms to developing the ecosystem?
I think my view on incubators has changed a lot over time, and maybe my answer won't be what you expect. I think it really depends on how incubators are designed and who exactly they serve and what the model is, because I've seen incubators in Iraq, outside of Iraq, they have a nice curriculum, they tick a few boxes, but the founders, the startups, they don't do anything afterwards. And if we're talking about, like idea stage to MVP, so that's the goal of the incubator, then I've seen a lot of those fail. Maybe there's like a 5% success rate where someone actually follows through with the funding they get at the end and it turns into an actual business. So I haven't seen much success among incubators in Iraq, if I'm honest. And then the topic of accelerators who are dealing with more established businesses, they're obviously going to have a much higher success rate because people already have skin in the game and are invested in their business and they want it to grow. But then accelerators as well, you've got to look at that model and see, okay, what does the accelerator get out of supporting the business? Are they taking equity? Are they giving any money? What kind of mentorship are they providing? So incubators are important, and I think they're more of a tool for sort of educational purposes and awareness. I don't think they're as successful in creating long-lasting startups, if I'm honest.
And how does that? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
And
No, sorry, go on.
how does that fit in with Iraqi innovators?
So we never started as an incubator. For us, initially, when we launched, our goal was always to tackle that narrative, that negative narrative around Iraq. When I was living there, I remember getting such stupid questions from people in the UK being like, are there any malls? Do you have roads? That was the level of understanding of the country. And I was so sick of it. And having worked with entrepreneurs, I ran, one of the first accelerators in the country. And I just thought, like, these are stories that need to be promoted and heard. And Iraqi voices need to be exemplified. Instead, we're always hearing about Iraq through the BBC or through NGO reports. And that's the challenge that I wanted to tackle. How do we shed light on what's actually happening? So Iraqi Innovators, first and foremost, is a media source. It's the main source of tech and startup news for the country. And we want to continue that work for years to come. But as far as it goes with incubators and accelerators and programs in general, I think I've become just quite disillusioned over the years, having worked in the public sector and seen the lack of impact that it's had compared to the money they've had to deliver that impact. I think the change is going to come from Iraqis themselves. And so especially foreign incubators, I'm always suspicious of, because I feel like if you've not run a business yourself in Iraq, if you've not registered your business, run it successfully, and exited or whatever your end game was, you have no business to then teach other people how to do it.
And what sort of advocacy work are you doing with Iraqi innovators? I think you mentioned some like as a media source, but like what other things are you doing to try and raise awareness?
So we've been working with the Iraqi embassy in London to do these events to promote different industries in the country and show that there is a lot of investment opportunities in different sectors. Something that we're exploring as well is kind of providing more data, because this is a massive gap. There's just no data on much of anything. And we're exploring whether we want to kind of transition into a media and data hub to see if people would pay to access that data so that they can make better informed decisions when it comes to opening their businesses or trying to get new clients, etc. So that's TBC, and the main goal has always been for us. We want to continue promoting Iraq. We want to help it grow, and we do that through the means we have, which is one of privilege, having access to the UK and being able to be based here and live here. But also, in just engaging the diaspora more, who do have a yearning and an interest to support Iraq. But some often, they might not know how.
Fantastic. Zahra, tell us more about, well, your current projects and any upcoming projects you're working on.
So at the moment, so like I said, we're kind of in the process of changing the platform. So we've had quite like a basic platform over the years, and we're in the process now of completely giving it a makeover and providing some of the data that we've been collecting over the years on startups and investments, and putting that out there, and then taking it from there and seeing what the appetite is among people in and outside of Iraq to have access to that information.
Fantastic. And what's the best way to get in touch with you and Iraqi innovators?
So LinkedIn, I've deleted X, and I have an on and off relationship with Instagram. So best way is LinkedIn, and you can also email on info@iraqtech.io. We're pretty responsive, so we always love to hear from new people. So yeah, please do reach out.
Zahra Shah, this has been a fantastic conversation. I wish you all the best in your endeavors and the rest for 24 and going into 25.
Thank you so much, Hassan. Thank you for inviting me, and I really enjoyed the conversation.